Whoopi Goldberg was nearly taken from the world in 2019. Not by controversy, not by critics, but by pneumonia and sepsis that left doctors genuinely uncertain whether she would survive. For a woman who had spent decades building one of the most recognizable voices in American entertainment, the cruelest threat turned out to be the simple act of breathing. But to understand why her survival felt so significant, you have to go back to where it all began. A cramped apartment in Manhattan's Chelsea housing projects, where a little girl named Karen Elaine Johnson was learning that the world rarely makes room for people like her without a fight. Karen grew up in the 1950s and 60s, alongside her brother Clyde, raised almost entirely by their mother Emma, a nurse and teacher who worked herself to exhaustion, keeping the family afloat after the children's father left. Money was always scarce, shoes wore through before replacements came. And at school, the struggles that would later be recognized as dyslexia were instead treated as laziness or low intelligence. Nobody looked closely enough to understand the sharp, observant mind behind the confused relationship with printed words. She left school without graduating, carrying shame that was never rightfully hers. Adolescence brought its own brutal lessons. Facing an unplanned pregnancy at 14, she found herself without safe options, a reality she would later discuss publicly when speaking about the dangers young women face without access to compassionate medical support. By 15, changes in New York law meant a second similar situation could be handled safely. That contrast stayed with her for life and quietly shaped her lifelong advocacy for women's health. She struggled with substance dependency in her late teens before finding her way toward recovery, a process she has credited partly to a counselor she later married. But the most powerful motivator was her daughter, Alexandria. Becoming a young mother gave her a reason to rebuild that went beyond herself. She waited tables, laid bricks, worked as a bank teller, and applied cosmetics in a mortuary. She taught acting and comedy in Berkeley's experimental theater spaces. Every paycheck was protection, every shift was a promise to her daughter. The entertainment world eventually opened its doors. A one-woman show led to 156 sold-out Broadway performances. Steven Spielberg cast her as Celie in The Color Purple in 1985, earning her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. 5 years later, Ghost brought her the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, only the second black woman in history to win an acting Oscar. Sister Act made her beloved across generations worldwide. Then came The View, where her unfiltered opinions repeatedly sparked national controversy. Her remarks on several high-profile cases drew significant backlash and public criticism. She has since reflected on some of those moments, acknowledging the weight that words carry when spoken to millions. 3 marriages came and went, each ending not in scandal, but in the quiet recognition that love, to be real, cannot ask a woman to disappear inside it. At 70, she remains at the table, still sharp, still outspoken, still carrying the distance between a housing project classroom and everything she eventually built. Her mother Emma and brother Clyde are both gone now, their absences felt in the spaces between the applause. But her daughter, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren fill the rooms of a life she constructed entirely on her own terms. If her story has ever made you feel less alone in your own struggles, hit like and subscribe, because stories like hers deserve to be heard.